I am whelmed. We get several interesting new cards, but most of the ones worth watching are support cards for old decks rather than the shiny new toys. For example, our first new card is Metageas. On the surface, a Dragias that can't be destroyed by Widespread Ruin sounds great, but it is quite awkward. Not only are we only able to use the second attack on a monster, but the skill is so unimpressive, I'm tempted to just run Dragias aggro instead. The deck is able to boost Curse of Dragon to 2600, but Servant of Dawn gives us a 2700 Flame Cerberus alongside additional flexibility. Full Metal Fist further features a funky restriction, listing 1300 attack monsters rather than the traditional 1400. This will notably exclude the Beast package, as well as Thunder the Thunder from the pool of options. Next up is Dynamix. And while maximums are cool, this one doesn't even get a skill to support it. You're going to die before you ever summon the card, and if you don't, you're going to have so few life points that you lose to Talismanic Seal Ray, even with the card's battle protection. On the other hand, Dynodon does get a few interesting cards, including a Mystic Dealer variant and a Hammer Crush that has a very tough requirement, but is also able to destroy set monsters. I think this card might end up being a little bit too situational, but it is able to get through a set 3 board, one of the biggest weaknesses of that variant. Moving back to the URs, we have Steel Mech Lord Mirror Innovator, and it is a card actually worthy of a Limit 3 status. The card is incredibly strong, but unfortunately it probably isn't going to show up as much as it should. This is because it shares the Limit 3 with Acebreaker in Ultimate Bond. It has too much attack to use in Maximum Overlord, and it otherwise is competing with Dragias in decks with flight restrictions. It'll probably end up in a variant of Magician Shuffle. On the other hand, we do have other good new machine support. Much like dinosaurs, they are getting a Mystic Dealer clone. And the new Surge Bicorn is a mandatory 3-of, even though Ultimate Bond is able to search out the Amigos. Bicorn lets you get in those seamless double boss boards, as Amigo doesn't actually generate advantage, while this does. I think Chaos Femtron is exactly what the Cybers deck needs. It is a free +1 that is able to grab a maximum piece and also sets up your Attitude Hydron. It is the perfect card. Unfortunately, it isn't going to be able to solve the deck's biggest weakness, all of these monsters having super low defense and being weak to Sword and Shield. But I think Cybers could finally move up from Rogue to tiered status. Harpies are getting a huge boost with Avian Spell Strategy. Ghost Cyclone was already a really strong card in the deck, as it's always a Talismanic Seal Ray away from being live. However, I don't think it can compare with Avian Spell Strategy putting your maximum pieces back on top of the deck, meaning you are always ready to get a new boss on board next turn. It takes an already really consistent deck and launches it into the stratosphere. Isark feels like a card that should be bad, but the skill might just be good enough to make it work. Isark requires 3 warriors in the graveyard, and the skill provides 2 of them each turn. With just a bit of setup, you have a 3000 attack point monster that brings out a 2500 beat stick for free. And as always, Gakuto decks are incredibly resilient to Shield and Sword, which is huge. Out of all the new decks from the box, this is the one I am most excited to try, even if it doesn't end up being a tier 1 strategy. There are a couple of other notable SR cards. Tribute Lock is very powerful against a ton of decks, but I think it is just a little bit too conditional, combining that life point requirement alongside a format where some of these decks are able to just special summon their boss monsters and not be running into Tribute Lock at all. Stockbuster Dragon is bad, but the Metageas decks are basically forced to run it if they want to be able to get new cards in their hand to trigger the monster. Mighty Gaze of the Sky Emperor is a silly card, because Yggdrago already does the exact same thing. You might see players use this as a funky cycle in Maximum Overlord decks, after they are able to bring out the headpiece using the skill. However, Torna is going to be the better card 99% of the time. Moving on to the rares, we see the Sports Dragons are getting a second reprint. And we also get Righteous Dragon, which is a win more card that Dragon decks are able to use to fill out level 5 or higher requirements for their skills, or to get out a third boss monster if they already have 2 level 7s on board and only have the 1 space available. Notably, if this card was level 4 instead of level 5, it would be amazing. But instead, it is incredibly mid. The normals also have a few potentially interesting cards. We get 2 new 1400 attack point dinosaurs, but unfortunately, neither of them have the 1200 defense you need to use them in Servant of Dawn. We get Cyclotron, the first 1500 base defender in Duel Links. This is actually pretty useful for being able to wall out cards like Dragorite or Gazelle, and it means your turn 1 set boards are now no longer guaranteed to be getting cleared by whatever the opponent summons. However, I think this might be a little bit too niche to see consistent play as a staple in the meta. Finally, a format too late. We are getting Brutal Retribution, a card capable of bringing back any 2 monsters if 2 or more of your normal monsters are destroyed. If your opponent goes for a Hell Tuning Invasion or a Death Doom Requiem, and you have normal monsters on field, you can bring back your biggest boss monsters to fend off the push. Overall, I'm honestly really disappointed that we aren't getting any of the field spells that I really want to see in the game. And once again, cards like Counter Shield are not here to buff the normal monsters. But those are just cards I am fiending for. There are a couple of new cards that should make new decks. There are a couple of cards that buff existing strategies. It's not that bad of a box. Though I do hear we are also getting a structure deck soon. And we'll have to see how that one turns out.